welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars pod, where the excitement is at fever pitch levels today. If you hadn't worked it out already, this episode is going to be slightly different. So here is your content warning. This episode will contain strong language and themes of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Smut!
I mean, I thought I was going to lower the tone over the course of this episode,
No,
but clearly my
definitely not.
esteemed American colleague is doing so admirably already. Luke Reynolds is in the house. All things are good, therefore, but the reason we are particularly excited today is that I have one of my favourite non-Napoleonic historians in the house. And you might think, well, this is a bit odd, Zach. Why are you bringing a non-Napoleonic historian onto a Napoleonic show? But there is very good reason, because we have a late medieval and early modern period expert. We are joined by Eleanor Janega, historian specializing in sexuality, propaganda, apocalypticism, urbanity, and empire during that period. Eleanor is a powerhouse and an absolute tour de force. She's the host of the Going Medieval podcast, the We're Not So Different podcast. She's the author of The Once and Future Sex, Going Medieval on Women's Roles in Society. I recently had the privilege of sharing a stage with her at the Chalk Valley History Festival, where she effectively knocked out a home run in terms of just bringing it when we were talking about toxic love during history generally. And to be honest, my interactions with Eleanor were kind of set on a certain path the first time I interviewed her back on History Hack, where one of her opening lines was, well, the thing you have to remember about Voltaire is that he was a prick.
Past me was so real for that.
It's kind of set a mold for the things we discuss ever since. Eleanor, welcome. Great to see you. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I am so ready to lower the tone. I'm ready to make people go, huh. I'm ready to make people really question why they've turned this podcast on. You know, that's what I live for, baby.
That is what we are here for. Join us in the gutter, Eleanor. Or me, at least, and let Zach wander around.
But I'm looking at the stars, Luke. I'm looking at the stars.
Absolutely.
So.
You see, you may be an early modernist, but you know you're wild.
That's right. That's right. Well, you know, anyone who is a nasty little slut like that is always going to be a personal fan. So I'm going to be a fan of them personally. I don't think that Oscar Wilde is a personal fan of mine, but a girl can dream, you know. He's in heaven.
Know.
He's listening to the pod right now, obviously.
This
Unlike
podcast,
Voltaire, who I'll see in hell. Thank you.
This podcast is probably endorsed by Oscar Wilde. Maybe.
That's right. That's right.
Possibly. Almost certainly not.
Get it in writing.
We should, however, just qualify Voltaire. He was a prick, but just explain to our listeners who Voltaire was and why he was a prick.
Voltaire. Okay, so Voltaire is one of the philosophers. I think that we can all agree on that. So, you know, he is one of the guys who is sitting around attempting to establish modernity, really. Which is no bad thing. I'm not mad about that. I think that the Enlightenment had some good points about it. I think it isn't a bad idea to sit around and be a nerd. For example, I'm doing that all the time. I really understand it. The trouble with Voltaire's philosophy and the way that he wrote about things is he decided that he was the smartest little lad who'd ever lived. And that everyone who was ever alive before him was stupid. And that's like literally the way that he thought about things. So he refers to everything that came before the Enlightenment, well, the medieval period, really. You know, I'm sure he was cranking it to the Romans at all times. But he refers to this as the age of faith. And he contrasts that with the Enlightenment forward, which he calls the age of reason. And so as a result, he basically is like, well, you can just discard every single thing that anyone was doing before I came along and freed everyone from the shackles of thinking about religion, right? And, you know, look, I get it. It's very popular to kind of think that anyone who believes in God is an idiot. And, you know, we've all met Southern Baptists. The struggle's real. I get it. I really, really do. But The fact of the matter is, Voltaire was not smarter than Thomas fucking Aquinas. Like, I'm sorry, he wasn't. He just wasn't, right? And like, yeah, sure, Candide is great, but like, let's be reasonable for 5 seconds about who accomplishes what and the limitations of believing in oneself as though they are a god and that they have some expansive way of thinking about the world. And so for me, Voltaire is a personal problem because the way that he talks about the Middle Ages, this is where the misunderstanding of the Middle Ages begins. So we have a term in medieval history which we've had to stop using because idiots misunderstood it, and they misunderstood it because of Voltaire, where we used to refer to the early medieval period, so around about 476 to I don't know. It depends on who you ask. Some people say like the year 1000. I usually say the year 800 because by the time you got Charlemagne, everything kind of improves. But we use the term Dark Ages to describe this period because we don't have a lot of sources for it. And the reason that we don't have a lot of sources for it, just in case Maddie Iglesias is listening to this, in which case it's on site, bitch. I'll see you out back. The reason we don't have a lot of sources is because I don't know if you know this, but 475 is a really long time ago. Like it's a really long time ago, right? And medieval people were similarly cranking it about Romans. So they privileged keeping Roman documentation over keeping their own. Like if something was sort of like 50 years old, they were like, fuck it, why do I need this around? Like this isn't going to help me in any way, shape, or form. Also, everybody is writing things on parchment, which is dried animal skins. Rats like to eat those. Mice like to eat those. They're very hard to keep round because they are so yummy. And also, when you're lighting everything using fire, stuff burns down a lot, especially all of your dried animal skins, right? So, we lose things in fires constantly. And we also lose things in especially the early modern period because of this prejudice against the medieval period. So we have certain bad things happen, like earlier here in England, for example, you get Henry VIII, which is always a problem. And when he shutters the monasteries, we lose tons and tons and tons of sources because the monks had all of these things. And then the rich guys who took over, they're like, I don't give a fuck. I don't care about any of these books, whatever, burn them. It doesn't matter to me. Like, just get rid of them. In the German lands, in the Holy Roman Empire, we have this problem, which is the consolidation of the libraries and monasteries, where the Habsburgs are like, oh, you know what, let's put it all in one place. It's going to be fine. But they also just say, oh, like Reddit, boring, don't care, Reddit, and they just kind of like get rid of a lot of medieval manuscripts because they don't necessarily see the benefit of it because again, Voltaire is such a prick that he's convinced everybody that you don't need these things. So a lot of the time we just lose sources because people don't care about them anymore. Like unless it's pretty, unless it's got a bunch of gold on it, no one is going to bother keeping it. And so we lose a lot of things, right? Anyway, so we were using this term to be like, ooh, difficult to see what's going on here. And Voltaire is like, yeah, because everyone's fucking stupid. Not like me, a cool guy who knows what's up. And then unfortunately, everyone else in the world, like, because everybody likes to think that they're smarter than people in the past, don't they? Right. And I think there is also this specific thing where everyone wants to believe that they kind of like would have done better. They're like, yeah, well, if I'd been alive in the medieval period, it wouldn't have gone down like that. Like I would have discovered germ theory or whatever, where I'm like, Voltaire also didn't fucking know about germ theory. So like, absolutely get out of my face with that one. Right. So there is this way of like, we think that we are smarter when really, to use a medieval term, we are standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like we can see further as a result of all the work that's come before us. But Voltaire is really the one who's spoken to the world. It's like, okay, you don't have to even worry about this. And it's created this really unique form of ignorance surrounding this period of 1,000 years or so, where people are like, I don't need to know about that. Everyone was stupid then. And it's like, okay, well, who looks ignorant now? Right? Like you're just ignoring 1,000 years of history because, some French guy told you it was chill. And it's like, to me, it just seems like lazy, right? Where it's like, you just don't want to do the reading, bitch. Like you just really don't want to deal with the Latin. And I know what's going on with you. So, anyway, Oscar Wilde is in heaven, but I'm going to hell intentionally so I can wrestle Voltaire. Thank you very much. That's what's up.
tour de force there from Eleanor. A couple of things worth taking away from that. Number one is that fire burns things. Number two is that Voltaire was the 17th century equivalent of a crypto bro.
He
Um,
was.
so strip away. So here's the thing, right? We're talking about sort of how much all of this is shaped by the Romans, and everyone is cranking it to the Romans, and everyone wants to be the new Aristotle. And everyone is trying to one up Voltaire, which that one we'll give our blessing to. Um, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is shaped not actually by the past so much, but by the future. Because our ideas of the the late 18th and the early 19th century, especially in Britain, are shaped enormously by the Victorians. And the Victorians, you know, for all of those bridges and all of those trains had ideas, both large I and small I ideas. So we're here to talk about sex. So strip away all of the Victorian pearl clutching moralism, all of that bullshit about, let's cover the feet of tables, horseshit. Like I've seen the carved pricks that they had on the tables. They were kinky bitches. That this is when nipple piercings became big. Like we can talk about this.
Can I just add to that? Like, how do we think that Victoria had so many kids? Like, what people don't realize is that Victoria was so horny, they had to separate her from Albert because she was wearing him out.
Yeah.
So I'm very sorry to derail your question there, Luke, but just like people wake up.
I just want to say, where the hell do you think the Prince Albert piercing gets its name from?
Exactly
Please.
that. Exactly
Grow up.
that, right?
Grow up.
I mean, admittedly, that one has a sartorial benefit as well that sort of ties in there. This is Zach, for the record, this is what you knew was going to happen when you put me and Eleanor in the same quote unquote room together. God help us if we ever end up in the same actual room together. So yes, Victoria being horny, Prince Albert piercings to make sure the front of your britches are as smooth as humanly possible to the side. What's the real attitude to sex? And that is the broad church of sex during the Napoleonic, and we'll go with ish era.
Yeah, so I think that the thing that people need to understand is that everyone has always been horny. And that's just it. There isn't another way of putting it. People like to have sex. That's why we're all here, because that is the unfortunate byproduct of sex. But this is what happens when people want to get down. What's interesting is that I think in some ways in the modern period, we get new and renewed ideas of guilt, though, and shame that begin to come in. Because medieval people, they're like having sex all over the place all the time. And the church is like, please, I'm just like begging you, stop, do that. And medieval people are like, absolutely not. Right. And the church are like, the only reason you should be having sex is you should be having sex with your spouse in order to get pregnant. And then medieval people are like, well, guess what? I like hand jobs. So they're constantly like trying to have non-procreative sex, which is what the church would term sodomy, because they are just like, well, actually, now that you've told me not to do it, that's what I like, and that's what's fun for me. One of the big things that we see come in the Enlightenment and what ends up happening around the Napoleonic period, and then this kind of like picks up steam in the Victorian period, is that people begin to think about sex more quote unquote scientifically in certain ways. So this is a big problem that we have with people like, for example, Rousseau as a philosopher, right? So people say, oh, well, yes, procreation happens as a result of sex, but this isn't a religious thing. Don't you dare think that this is a God thing, right? So this must be scientific, yeah? And so as a result, sex definitely only exists for procreation. And it's like, guys, you're doing that. The church would be delighted. The church was like, yeah, that's right. Right. So, just kind of like agreeing that like that's why you should be doing it. Right. But we also have these new ideas about femininity. And that's what really changes the way a lot of people think about sex. So up until the Enlightenment period, the way that people think about women, and still there is some spillover, certainly in the Napoleonic era, the Victorians turn all this on their head. You have to understand that women are the horny gender for the great majority of recorded European history, right? So women are the horny gender, and this is because men are the default gender. They are created in God's image, and they are all the good things. Men are logical, men are spiritual, men are able to focus on the being, if you're Roman, a good Roman citizen, if you are Christian, on being a good Christian. And as a result, they're able to overcome things like sexual desire. Women, on the other hand, are these base things. We are the opposite of men. That's how we're defined. We don't have a definition outside of being an inverse of men. And we are incredibly carnal. We're bodily. We're emotional. We are unable to overcome our bodily functions and desires. And so as a result, we are overwhelmingly horny. There are also some humoral ideas about this. So women are cold and wet, and men are hot and dry. In terms of humoral theory, you're either cold, hot, dry, or wet. These things end up in combinations, and this then maps onto blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm, blah, blah, blah. You know the drill. But because women are cold and wet, we are desirous of having sex because we're kind of like lizards, but for sex. And we're trying to have sex in order to warm up. So we're sort of like, oh, I'm so cold as an individual. If only I could get dick down, that would really improve things. And then also, and I'm being very serious about this. Aristotle would tell you this. What we want to do is like we're looking for that jizz, because jizz is the essence of masculinity, and it is so hot and dry that it'll heat us up. So it's like, for us, jizz is the sun. And so women are just constantly begging for that jizz, right? In order to become warmer and overcome our nature, right? And then you have to worry. It's great. There's a real fellas, is it gay to have sex with women energy for quite a long time, because the idea is that if you jizz too much, you'll become cold and wet like a woman. And if you're pumping women all the time, then you'll probably have sex with men too, right? Which is, and I'm being serious. Like, I mean, it just perfect reasoning, right? So we're starting to see that get turned on its head, though, because one of the things that kind of comes in with the, oh, well, sex is scientific, because they're like, and you're allowed to like it. Oh, because it's scientific, so now you're allowed to enjoy it. Because, well, wow, it's not that like I'm a bad Christian. It's that, I'm just following my biological destiny, which is to procreate. And so therefore I enjoy sex. And so as a result, because sex is no longer very bad and naughty, women don't like it anymore. Men like it. And we change the gender of who likes sex and who is sexual. Because anytime a woman likes something, it's probably bad. And anytime a man likes something, it's probably good. It's kind of like, how in careers, if women dominate an industry, it's really low paid. And then if men take it over, like computing, then it becomes highly paid. And like vice versa. If men dominate an industry like academia and then women get into it, it's like, oh, we gotta shut the whole thing down. Put the brakes on academia. We got to stop this, right? So it's like that for anything else. And so as a result, we begin to have these new ideas about sexuality in the Enlightenment period. And we also have these new ideas about femininity, and the idea that femininity is sort of defined by these procreative roles, which is that's not new, right? But there's this idea about the naturalness of it and the scientificness of it. So especially in bourgeois circles, what begins to happen is that there's this idea that women should not take part in public life, because women are naturally, mommies. They're mommies. They're mommies, and they should be at home having babies and taking care of them. And so that means that they shouldn't be involved in the business world. They shouldn't be involved in politics. They shouldn't be involved in all these things that heretofore they had been increasingly involved in. So we have this new middle class idea of what it is that women do and where they should be. Now, to be clear, for incredibly elite women, this doesn't really change anything, because, like, if you're the queen, you're the queen. If you're a lady, you're a lady. Like, you're still going to be expected to be in public doing your job. And it certainly doesn't change things for working class women, because the clue's in the name, right? Like you're still going to have to go to work, right? But middle class women have this increasing retreat from societal life and into the home. And this is when we really get to ramp up the Madonna whore complex. So, especially by the time we get to the Victorian period, what ends up happening is you have this idea of the angel in the house, right? Where, your wife is this perfect mommy and she's at home and she's making you a little cocoa and she's like, I don't know, sweeping all the weird carpets they have, which I bet would have been hell. I really don't, envy them that one. She's making a weird blamage. She's doing all of these things. And so as a result, you're like, I can't fuck her. That's my mommy, right? Like we wouldn't do that. So you have this really burgeoning sex industry as a result of that. Now you have a burgeoning sex industry in the medieval period. Everyone was like, oh yeah, going down to the brothel. That's a nice Tuesday night. We can all enjoy that, right? Which we won't get into right now. But that is increasingly in the early modern period cracked down on because when we invent Protestants, Catholics and Protestants get in this kind of like a religious arms race where they're like, no, I'm holy. No, like I'm the holy one. I bet you're down the brothel. No, you're at the brothel. No, shut up. You shut up. Right. And then they like close down all the brothels. And Victorians are like, well, maybe we could have a little brothel. Right? Because like you can't have sex with mommy. So like where are you going to go have sex? Right. And so you have this huge proliferation of brothels, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries. Like in the 18th and 19th centuries, it's like, first of all, you're going to go to the music hall, you're going to go to a play. And then also a lot of time you're at a play. Guess what? Guess what all those actors also do? It's like, oh, you bought tickets to the show. Do you want to buy tickets to the show? And there, especially in the early modern period, there is a real fine line between actors and sex workers, if there is one at all, indeed. So like here in London, for example, Shakespeare's Globe was directly next to like one of the largest brothel areas in the city, the Stews, where it's like, you go have a bath and a hand job. And, it's a great Tuesday night. That's a wonderful thing to do. So, you can do something real highfalutin, like see a Shakespeare play and then go get cranked off. Fantastic stuff, right? And, this then continues as theater becomes more popular, as music halls become more popular, as vaudeville becomes more popular. And it isn't to say that every actor or performer is always a sex worker, but a lot of them are. And a lot of them are working in areas cheek by jowl, because it's all a kind of part of a burgeoning entertainment industry. And so it's this kind of perfect storm, because if you're not supposed to have sex with your wife and you're horny because everybody is, then, off you pop, like just go out on the town and do what it is you do. So we have this kind of rebirth at the time of the commercial sex industry, and rather a lot of sexuality in a lot of cases. And so, and I would argue as we get later into the 19th century, right, this leads to, why Freudianism is bullshit. Also, tell Freud I said it. Tell him right now, right? Because like he's hanging out with a bunch of like a coked up, bored Viennese housewives in like the 1890s who are all sexually repressed because they're living in this particularly bourgeois society, and their husband's getting a hand job down the way, and like they've got nothing else to do, and so they're all like mad horny in this very specific way. And Freud is like, damn, this really says a lot about the entire human condition. And I'm like, it doesn't, Freud. It says a lot about bourgeois Viennese society, bro. Like, grow up. But whatever, right? Like you absolutely cannot do this for all of human history, but he's going to try. He's going to try it. He did like Chow Chows though. So he and I have that in common. So Freud, noted Chow Chow fan. Anyway, the point is things just get like really, complex in this way that they kind of hadn't been before. Like in the medieval period, it's super straightforward. The church is saying stop having sex. Everyone is saying no. And like that, and that's just what it is. But in the modern period, because we have these new ideas about nature, about procreation, about science, and about this sort of realities of gender and how these are supposed to map onto scientific ideals, that makes our sexuality a bit more muddled up. Victorians also are responsible for a lot of the misconceptions about sexuality in medieval history as well. Let me do a massive segue here just because I want to get on it. Because like one of the things I get asked about a lot is like, oh, what is it with medieval people and chastity belts? I'm like, it was Victorians. It was Victorians the whole time, mouth directly on mic. There was no such thing as a fucking chastity belt. Victorians were just like cranking it and invented the idea of the chastity belt and then made some examples. And they're like, isn't that sick? Isn't that perverse? I can't believe medieval people would do that. And it's like, bro, please calm down. Like, and they're like, yeah, but wherever they went, they had to wear them because they would get raped. Dude, be real. But Victorians love to invent a medieval torture instrument. That's the other than going down the brothel, they invent medieval torture instruments. They're like the Iron Maiden, yeah, and you're like, okay, bro, I'm glad you're having fun. You know,
I mean, inventing torture instruments is a weird kind of kink.
yeah.
I mean, I
I mean,
shouldn't shame it because I haven't tried it, but like,
that's true. That's true. Look, they're a complex people, the Victorians. I love them. I'm obsessed with them. They make my life really hard. But they're like when they do it, it's cute. When Voltaire does it, it isn't. That's just it.
okay. And here's me complaining that I have to deal with the kiss me kismet Hardy bollocks. And like in the grand scheme of things, this has really kind of contextualized my complaints about the Victorians and their prudism. And oh no, we can't possibly have Hardy taking a kiss from a man. Oh no, that's utterly unacceptable. And like you're there kind of going, yeah, but they've just layered so many misconceptions on how I work. Like, take a seat, Zach. Stop your whining.
Let the homies make out on their deathbed. All right? We should be kissing the homies goodnight. We should be kissing the homies on their deathbed. That's what's up.
I'm going to do a rare thing and bring us sort of on track and talk about flirting.
Oh, Zach, are you looking for tips?
We did include a profanity filter a while back. Now that's gone out the window. So for one time only, I'm actually able to invite you, Luke, to just fuck off. But we are going to talk about flirting and specifically what it looked like during this kind of late 18th, early 19th century thing, because we've got the whole kind of Pride and Prejudice thing and Oh, Mr. Darcy and all of those kind of ideas. But kind of like you're talking about with Freud, it's a snapshot of a particular subsection of society where that is then romanticized and taken in a particular way that is not representative of the whole. So if you're going to flirt during this period, what's it look like? Because it must have happened. It's not like somebody suddenly invented flirting sometime around 1990. So what's the deal?
Oh yeah, flirting is so cool in this period, actually. My favorite form of flirting in this period is fan flirting. Do you know about this, about fan codes? Which is like, the fan code walked so the hanky code could run. And if you know your
I'm sorry, Eleanor. This is for this audience. Like that broke me. You're gonna have to explain what the hanky code is because our audience does not know that.
Okay, so the hanky code is a way of signaling, especially in the gay community, what sexual acts one might be into. So you get a handkerchief and you wear it in various locations. So various handkerchiefs have various meanings. And generally, if you then put like the color of whatever it is in your back pocket, that would indicate that one is a bottom. If you wear it around your neck, that would indicate that one is a top. And there's all sorts of things. Off the top of my head, the only one that I know is that red is fisting. And I only know this because of a costume I wore to a party once, and then my cousin made fun of me.
My favorite detail on this is that there is a particular type of gay fetish that is referred to as T-play. And for that, it's not a handkerchief, it's a lace doily.
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. I'd like shout out to everyone into T-play. I love this.
Amen.
Okay, so fan flirting though, this is like it's predominantly straight. Although I cannot say that the gays were not getting down with it, right? Like I have nowhere to go with this. But when fans were a more common accoutrement, right? Now, I mean, they're kind of back in London now that it's so hot. You see a lot of people with fans. We're like, we're bringing it back. So I'm going to have to learn all of these. But I went and looked them up so that I could do this right. So, for example, if you carry your hand in your right hand in front of your face at a man, it means follow me. Right? Carrying it in your left hand means that you're desirous of an acquaintance. you would like to meet. If you put it on your right ear, it means you've changed. If you twirl it around in your left hand, it means like I'm tired of you. Like, boo, go away. Um, if you move your fan across your forehead, it means that you're being watched. Um, if you carry your fan around in your right hand, you're signaling to the dude that he's like too into it. It's like you need to cool it off. Um, if you draw your fan through your hand, it means I hate you, which is quite funny. If you twirl around on your right hand, it means that you're in love with somebody else. And then if you kind of like close it suddenly, it means that you want to talk to them. So there are all these ways of initiating conversation. And there are just ways of kind of like signaling across the road, like, yes, no, I'm married, I'm engaged, blah, 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 stuff like that. So that you can just kind of flag up or fan up, I guess, in this case, what it is you might be available for and what it is you want to do. And so it's got this great plausible deniability if you are in these circles. And, you can use these fans anywhere, right? Like, obviously, they exist at balls and things like that. But it's also just like if you're at a large tea or a dinner or something, everyone would have their fan there. And you can just be like, twirling it around, letting people know so that people can make eyes at each other. And this really involved kind of almost stylized form of flirting, which I absolutely love. The thing that's difficult with flirting in this period, and generally this is true throughout the pre-modern period, is it's hard, especially in bourgeois and upper class circles, to flirt because you're not supposed to be hanging out with members of the opposite sex kind of like at all, unless there are going to be people who are chaperoning you. So like your mom is there or whatever. And like that's why you got to have the fan come. Because like if someone's mom's there, someone's aunt's there, and you're like trying to like make eyes at a dude, and then you don't want to be gossiped about. You don't want this to get back to your parents or anyone else that you are kind of putting yourself out there, right? And it shouldn't be lost on any of us that these codes are all things for women to be doing. So, you can be approachable. You can actually kind of take the reins on this one. But what is definitely going to be more difficult for them is that they're not supposed to be doing it, blah, blah, blah. But of course, life finds a way, right? It's there's always going to be a way that people can flirt. There's always going to be a way that they find to do sexual things or find time alone, even in these incredibly guarded circumstances. And indeed, in these incredibly guarded circumstances, what it ends up doing is encouraging them to get real sneaky with it. People really want to do these things, so they're just going to figure it out. There's no way to ever completely crack down on any of this. Now, if you are working class, dude, it's like it's a free for all. Like, go for your life. It doesn't matter. You're a maid, and you and the coal boy are absolutely having it off. Wherever you want. Like, it's fine. It's normal. But these are like much more considerations of the upper classes. But that's who we tend to study because that's what everybody cares about, right?
I mean, I think it behooves us as a podcast now to arrange somewhere, sometime, so that Eleanor can actually do this fan flirtation in person, preferably with a giant pride flag of the type that is now sweeping styles because of Pride Month is one of the hot months, and therefore you carry these flags, these fans. So what are we looking at in terms of exchanging knowledge, right? Is this the birth of the girly mags being handed around at Eton so that you get some idea of what you're looking at and what you're doing? Is this a period of, sort of the dirty novels, many of whom also play into that whole sort of Orientalist, like harem stuff, which is a whole different conversation? But how do people learn what to do? Or at least learn what people think they should do. And crucially, how does that differ for men and women?
Yeah, this is a period of the great proliferation of, magazines. So magazines are a huge big deal at the moment. And you can kind of slip these things in there in between the things that are acceptable. Like latest fashion styles and cookery things that people ought to be thinking about and talk about what is happening this season, right? And then you can also be like, oh, and by the way, here's this fan code. I went and looked up this fan code, and it is from Castles Magazine is where it was printed. So this is something that people are very expressly promulgating. This is something that everyone is kind of agreeing to do. And when you have this proliferation of new texts and new ways to circulate things, this is one of the things that happens as a result. It's kind of the equivalent of like a Cosmo quiz, or like the weird sex tips in Cosmo, which no one should ever follow, just by the way. But there's this kind of scintillating thing that you throw in with everything else, which helps move copies, but also you just don't mention that as the lead. You want to bury this, but this is certainly the sort of thing that people are looking to do. So you can certainly see this in women's magazines. There's the same sort of thing in men's mags. Absolutely. So like, I'm sure you get out Horse and Hounds, and there's also going to be like, hey, by the way, do you understand fan code, right? Because it's one thing if like women are like going around twirling their fans. If men don't understand what it is, then there's no good. And of course, you got some word of mouth. All it takes is one person to memorize this, and they can tell other people. And so, when the men retire to the drawing room after dinner to have like whiskey and cigars, they can then discuss all of these things, right? Like while the women sit around having tea. So you have two gendered ways of sharing this information, but it really starts with print, to be honest. And of course you can do that now. Like everybody's now suddenly literate. So you can talk about these things, you can write these things down, which is really fantastic.
See, recently people have been doing videos of crowd watching at Wimbledon, and kind of like layering on voices and like, what would they actually be saying and having all these conversations. And I now really want to do a version of that, but with fan code, because everybody's taken a fan to Wimbledon.
Oh, that's good.
It would be insane. And like, obviously nobody has a clue about fan code from the 18th century. When the average person in the crowd, look, stop making out that you are representative of the entirety of the human population, Reynolds.
I don't even claim to be a representative of the average.
But like all of these people who don't know what the fan codes are, doing all of these things, sending off these messages, like there must be some academic sitting right at the top at the back, kind of looking at some person fanning themselves, kind of going, so they got a thing for me? Or do they just not know what's going on? It would be, I would find it hilarious in a nerdy kind of way. What
I say, the Duchess of Kent just asked to meet me at the veranda.
Exactly. Bring it back, everybody. Bring it back.
So that's our new mission on this podcast, apparently. Talking about people that are on a mission, though, sex outside of marriage. It's a thing.
Oh, yeah, rather.
Like, can we please stop pretending that it doesn't? Actually, I'm not sure people do pretend that it's not a thing, but there's the classic kind of double standard of morality. Like Nelson becomes more popular when he has his affair with Emma Hamilton, and yet we all know how Emma Hamilton is denigrated. As Kate Jameson has mentioned before, Jarvis turns around and speaks of her as that infernal bitch, Emma Hamilton. So we've got this thing happening. Sex outside of marriage is happening. It takes two to tango. Nobody's pretending it doesn't. But what's the deal? What's the repercussions? And can we kind of take it as given that it is endemic for everybody? And that all of the thing that really interests me off the back of that is when we have these quote unquote scandals about Wellington having his latest affair and it being splashed sordidly all over the papers, or whoever it might be, why are people manufacturing that kind of faux outrage when actually the odds are that the person who printed that paper is, as you've put it, outside the Globe Theatre on a Tuesday night having a wild time? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, I think that this is a really interesting point, because one of the big things that you see in terms of all of this is going to be that there are varying expectations based on gender. And still is true, right? If you are a man and you have a lot of a straight man, and you have a lot of sexual partners, then it's like, wow, what a guy, fantastic. And if you are a woman and you have a lot of sexual partners, you're a big slut. What are you doing? So very bad, blah, blah, blah. And we're getting better with that, but we would be joking if we pretended it wasn't still in play. And similarly, that's what happens for sex outside of marriage. So men who are doing it, it's like, oh, what a lad. Way, like absolutely getting lots of play. If you're a married woman, really different stakes. Really different stakes, right? Where, for example, you can be divorced for infidelity. It's very difficult at this point in time to divorce your husband because of infidelity. It's possible, especially in the higher echelons of society, but you would also need to oftentimes like prove that they have like bastard children, for example. And even then, one doesn't always do that because one doesn't like to make more of a scene anyway. And a lot of times what ends up happening is people just kind of go their separate ways and it just very quietly kind of walk off from one another. Now, if you are the other woman, similarly, that's just not going to work out too well for you. This isn't to say that history isn't littered with other women. There are incredibly celebrated mistresses, across the medieval period, certainly into the early modern period, where everyone is like, copying their fashion looks. Even in the 13th century, Henry II's mistress, Rosamund Clifford, is madly celebrated. Everyone is like, God, she's so beautiful and pretty. And isn't it great? Isn't it nice? And like weird, that's a really weird one because everyone decides they like Rosamund Clifford because everyone hates Eleanor of Aquitaine. So they're like, yeah, actually Eleanor of Aquitaine is a lifetime bitch. We love Rosamund, blah, blah, blah. But you see this same pattern kind of repeated in the early modern period and, varying degrees of thinking about women as a result of this. And, certainly, Zach, you'd be the first one to say that this happens, for example, in Napoleon and Josephine's relationship, right? Napoleon is like having it away constantly. That's just what's going on. But, if Josephine does this once, everyone's like, wow. And yeah, it's literally one fucking time, right? And now like she is just the worst, right? And it's something that people bring up all the time, even historians who really should know better, right?
And I really shouldn't jump in here, but it's like Josephine is meant to owe Napoleon something. And like Napoleon, because he's so over the top, infatuated, like, it should be lovely that she's forced into this arranged marriage, having been discarded by her lover, and like just be grateful. Like, this guy is obsessed with you. What's it she says? Like, this guy doesn't love me, he worships me. Like, she looks at this relationship and is like, the fuck's going on here?
And I think that is such an important phrase because it really does show you the limitations of this sort of thing, where it's like that's not really a good way to run a relationship, right? Like it's quite unsettling, actually.
Yeah, it's a crazy situation, and it completely reflects what you're saying here. Napoleon goes and has all of these dalliances with actresses, and is very public. Some of these actresses actually like out the relationships publicly on stage, like, and these moments get huge cheers, and everyone's going, "Oh, Napoleon's such a stud! Look at him going and following this actress," and like the actress is 15 years old, and today we look at it and just go. The Marie Walewska situation is just horrific in the extreme. People go and read Kate Williams' fantastic biography of Josephine, because she talks in frankly quite distressing detail about the horrendous experiences of Marie Walewska at the hands of Napoleon. That relationship is not consensual by any stretch of the imagination. And yet, because it's Napoleon, like, it's Napoleon the Great Romantic, Napoleon the guy who manages to, woo any of these women because they're all just desperate to bask in the aura of his magnificence. So it's an absolute reflection of what you're saying. And the depressing thing is that just how little of this has changed over time. It goes back to what we're talking about at Chalk Valley. What you can say about the relationship between Napoleon and Josephine has very similar themes and similar threads and similar underlying problems to what happens in Henry VIII's relationship with Anne Boleyn, what Eleanor of Aquitaine is experiencing. There's just so much commonality in terms of how little has changed over the years.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when we see these paramours lined up as well, because it really depends on what public attitude is at the time in terms of how they're treated. Because oftentimes it could be something that people celebrate and it's just sort of fine. But it's also very important that one knows one's place as a result of this. You have to be completely ungrasping or seen to be so. Just very happy to be this side piece who isn't asking anything, who isn't attempting to rise through any form of sexual connection, in which case that's fine. Great job, everyone. And you can actually make a name for yourself, which is, I mean, I love the idea of these actresses announcing this on stage. It's like very like Ron Burgundy. Like, and also I'm in a relationship with Napoleon and he is a real handful in the sack. It's just kind of a thing like, great, good job, but that can help your star rise, right? And that's acceptable because everyone will just go, yeah, way, ooh, fantastic. But if you say, oh yeah, and where's my house and when am I moving in, and please treat me like a fully rounded human being, that's when you're going to get in trouble, right? So with the idea of women's sexuality in this, it's always going to be about, do you understand what your place is? And these are real social places in terms of how society is organized. So, especially if you come from the working classes, this can be a great way of moving up in the world, but you have to realize that there are limitations. And that just is how it is. You can trace this all the way back to like, come on, the Empress Theodora, something like that. Whereas like, it's cute that you're banging the emperor and everything, but you're an actress / sex worker, who knows what it means, right? And you just should never have been allowed to be empress. And so everybody hates her because that wasn't supposed to happen, right?
I'm reminded of the Duke of York's 1809 scandal and the selling of commissions. Do you know that one, Eleanor?
I do not.
Okay, so this is too much of a deep cut, but it's fair enough. So basically, the Duke of York was commander-in-chief of the British Army throughout this period. Actually, a relatively competent administrator, but not the best battlefield commander. This is in fact where the Duke of York 10,000. Oh, it's not that one. Oh, okay. I'm being corrected, but he was okay. But anyway, he's a relatively competent. We're agreed that he's a relatively competent
What I would say is everyone thinks that is the very common misconception, but he's not the grand old Duke of York who had 10,000 men, led them up to top of the hill and led them down again.
Okay. Well, I sit corrected on this podcast. It had to happen sooner or later.
Real QI moment. Just the horns going.
Exactly.
Wah, wah.
Oh God. Yeah, that's fair. But anyway, this one is confirmed. It was confirmed by Parliament, so I'm in safe ground here. Basically, in 1809, this huge scandal broke that his mistress, Mrs. Mary Ann Clark, was selling commissions, basically through her access to him. And the most salacious detail that everyone brings up is that she pinned reminders to his bed sheets, to his bed curtains.
Can we just pause for a second, though, and like flag the fact that this is the age where people sell their commissions? Oh, yeah. Like, it's the done thing. Mm-hmm. And yet, because a woman's involved, oh dear, let me reach for my fan because actually I need to send some kind of signal about this.
But yeah, exactly. Because what's happening here, it's like, oh, well, yeah, she's a missus, right? You're not supposed to be shagging around, even if it is the Duke of York. But then it's like everyone's going to look the other way because it's the Duke of York, right? Like, what are you really going to do, pleb? You're going to put up with whatever the Duke of York wants you to put up with until that extra thing happens. So that's usually how it goes with all this. It's like the icing on top. It's you can really get away with rather a lot until something is perceived as having been too much. And that something is usually a woman not understanding what her place is. Not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah, I mean, without question. And it is indicated, right? The Duke of York resigns in scandal. He's reinstated 2 years later, whereas Clark is just shuffled off into disgrace and only reappears in the when she writes a brief sort of bio trying to push back at all this and blame it on another man actually is sort of the safe, no, I'm just the cat's paw. I'm not an ambitious woman. But actually, I want to take this back to not just sex outside of marriage and affairs, but all of this across the board. Because we've been talking a lot about sort of the social consequences of this, and I want to talk a little bit about the physical consequences. Now, we'll get to birth and bastardom and all of that, but let's start with sort of the less obvious one, which is sexual health. Because you can conceal a bad case of the pox, you can't conceal a child. Um, some living advice there from Dr. Luke Reynolds.
Can I
So
just say some of the sound bites coming out of this episode are like we haven't had in 5 years.
it's true. It's true. All
Yeah,
right.
what I think one thing that we really got to understand is actually the early modern period is it's a real time and place for sexually transmitted infections. We can say that. So for example, the medieval period in contrast, like we have to just kind of wait for people to write down what certain symptoms may be. But for example, syphilis doesn't exist yet. And when syphilis does get invented by the French, if you ask the English, then it is this huge problem because nobody knows what to do. They've never experienced it before, and it becomes a really, well, firstly, deadly problem. And it drives people mad. It does all these terrible things. It also becomes, I learned the other day when I was speaking to my friend Carissa Harris, who works on obscenity in the medieval and early modern period, real common insult. So a very common insult among women in Scotland was to call other women a Glengarry bitch, which means that they're a syphilitic bitch. And I think that's beautiful. Bring it back. But yeah, we have all kinds of pox. We've got all these different things that begin to come out in the early modern period, and it does certainly influence, for example, makeup trends. So rather a lot more painting one's face white. And that can be because you've got smallpox scars as well, but it's like it covers a number of sins, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, just clown up. It's like it'll be fine. Just go full white and no one's gonna know what's going on, right? But certainly we know that there's rather a lot of the clap around, which you and I know better as chlamydia, things of this nature. But there are really, really difficult STIs that you require antibiotics, which don't exist yet, to treat, that can kill you, that can render you unable to procreate. They can do all these really terrible things that can eat your brain from the inside out. So it's really frightening stuff. And people still persevered and were horny anyway. And I think that's beautiful. Like about to risk it all. Gonna risk brain disease, risking brain disease for the D. But yeah, you certainly then begin to have more responses to that. So we begin to see, for example, the invention of the French letter or the condom. Right. So the invention of wrapping it up, which is awesome. Now, wrapping it up at the time, because we're using things like a sheep intestines, it's not going to be good for STIs. Really. It is very good for pregnancy, though. And so this is great news for everybody because up until this point, the major form of birth control was abortion. It again was pretty common in the medieval world. But then when we invent Protestants, everyone has to be like, no, I wasn't doing abortions. No, no, no. And usually that's just drinking so much pennyroyal tea that you will have a miscarriage. So fantastic. Now you no longer have to be pregnant. Beautiful. There's rather a lot of kind of ingesting things on that level. And so we start seeing prophylactics actually come in this period. And that is a great invention that everybody loves. And there's rather a lot of that about. And, it's not going to do the job that modern condoms do, but every step in the right direction is one that I want to celebrate personally. So this is also indicative of the fact that people are really thinking about what the side effects of sexual dalliances are, and how you need to comport yourself in the world if you are going to be partaking in various outrageous activities.
With an eye on what may or may not have been perceived as outrageous, though, for the hopeless bachelors and bachelorettes of the period, and I think there is perhaps a distinction in terms of perception again between bachelor and bachelorette here. Self gratification, was it
Mm.
frowned upon in a kind of don't do that, you'll go blind kind of way? Or is there kind of an acknowledgement that, well, you got to do what you got to do? And actually, if you go and do this thing that isn't actually going to send you blind, then maybe you're not going to be outside the Globe Theatre on a Tuesday night. And actually, that's to the benefit of society.
Yeah, what we tend to see rather a lot of is being like, well, young people, right? Like relating to very specifically self-love as something that young people do when they're like really hot and horny and heavy. And it's kind of like a seen as a boys will be boys, girls will be girls sort of a deal. You are meant to outgrow it usually, but that's also like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And also part of the outgrowing it is supposed to be specifically, well, go get married and then like your needs will be met. Right. And, but as a result, everyone sort of knows that it is continuing to take place. And indeed, we begin to see things like erotic literature proliferate. And certainly, thanks to the invention of the daguerreotype, some pretty good porn. And certainly also, pornographic drawings absolutely exist from this period. A lot of them exist from this period. Treat yourself to a look at some 18th century porn. You can Google it. It's fine. It's historical. No one can stop you. So these things, we can tell that there is rather a lot of interest in them because we just know what is surviving, right? And when you consider that people don't usually like catalog porn, you can appreciate how much more must have actually existed at the time. So this is one of those things that just kind of like passes by the wayside. And we're kind of needing to extrapolate from what we've got left, how much there actually was. So there is rather a lot of it about there are absolutely people looking at this stuff. And, Lady Chatterley's lover, I rest my case, right? Like that's what that's for. It's not made up.
Treat yourself to some 18th century porn. Join our Patreon.
That's right. That's right.
We have a running joke actually, Eleanor, that we need to start an only Lambs, who was one of Napoleon's marshals.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Feet pick of the Napoleonic greats.
exactly.
Oh yeah, watch the money. Just you're printing it. Hell yeah.
I mean, I'm telling you. Okay, so when Zach asked me to jump into this interview, which obviously got an immediate yes. Are you kidding me? Yes. I asked him if I could ask you this, and he said yes if we have time. And I think we do have time because you've covered all of our questions, and in fact, you've done it so well that you've anticipated certain questions.
She's a pro. She's a pro,
She
folks.
is indeed a pro. Although we have to be careful how we toss that around in this conversation. So you see a lot of this, and we can push this back also to your period as well, to the medieval and early modern. What are the tropes in historical fiction, historical romance that either delight you or drive you absolutely up the wall?
Yeah, one of the things that I find really interesting, and I mean, to a certain extent, Lady Chatterley's lover is responsible for this, is the idea of the rich lady with the stable boy, which I think is actually probably hugely unlikely, because of the massive risk to women of prominence if it's found out that they're having extramarital affairs in the first place, and you're just not going to risk it all for the stable boy. I mean, Equus be damned, right? Like, it's just not, that's not something that's really going to happen. Are you going to have sex with other people outside of your marriage? Yes, absolutely. But it's going to be the Duke of York, right? Like, that's who you throw in for. You're definitely not just going to be getting on with the cook, right? Like that's it. It doesn't really make any sense. But I think it kind of exists as a fetish for wealthy people at the time, and so as a result, people think that it might have actually happened, but it's like no, this is so incredibly unlikely. I think one of the things that also really bothers me as the trope is this idea that this isn't happening as well, that there isn't extramarital sex, that everyone is just chaste and good and they just get married. You know, this idea that I think that basically what it all boils down to is that people don't want to imagine that their parents had sex. They don't want to imagine that their grandparents that had sex. They don't want to imagine that their great grandparents had sex. So everyone likes to invent that sex kind of got invented in the 1960s. And before that, nobody was doing it. And if they were doing it, it was only after they said their prayers before bed, specifically because they wanted to have children, right? And so the further back in time you go from the 60s, the less sex everyone must have been having, right? So, you know, when you see, especially like here we are living in the stupid rise of fascism once again, and these guys are all like, we must return. And I'm like, yeah, to what, bro? Like syphilis and 25 mistresses? Like, I like one bit of that. It's not the syphilis. Okay. All right. But, you know, like there is this way of thinking about the world as though everyone was certainly very pure. And I hate that because it's so reductive and derivative. It's this flattening of history. And I find it really dehumanizing, you know, that people in the past weren't as fully human as we are now, that they don't experience the same things, that we have somehow come upon ribaldry, right? And no one had ever thought of that before. And I suppose also that would certainly extrapolate out to, like, you know, that gay people don't exist, so that there isn't like constant queer sex going on. Because there is just so much of it, right? And, you know, to the point where we have these interesting sort of cases, like with Victorians scratching their heads about lesbians, because they're like, I think it doesn't count. Right? Where it's like there's like no penetration as far as they're concerned. So like that's not really sex. So like I find whatever, girls have fun, right? You know, and we know this stuff because people are writing about it. You know, these things come up in legal codes, you know, and every time like a gay guy gets found out having too much fun behind a barn, you know, you do find out about it, you know, because it gets written down in a legal case. But for every guy that gets caught, you know, there's hundreds who made it out of there in time, you know. So, you know, George Michael learned a lot from the past. We can thank him for his service. You know, this isn't something that he invented. Although, if we hadn't invented cottaging before, I'm sure George Michael would have come up with it.
Pour one out for the sacrificial lambs who were caught by the cops, so that hundreds could survive and continue their lives.
Absolutely, yeah. We love those boys.
Absolutely. But don't forget, I mean, and this is important because we are a history podcast, that we really should make it clear that they were all just good friends.
Absolutely. Just good friends who spooned every night and kissed each other on the forehead and collected antique pottery, and called each other Nancy and had an extensive silk handkerchief collection. Just good friends. Just a couple of great friends.
Somehow we always come back to silk handkerchiefs.
Well, when you have me on the podcast, it's inevitable.
Eleanor, honestly, what an episode. Some of that was probably broadcastable as well.
Like, it's not my fault. This is a legitimate form of study.
Exactly. People, you can't come and complain to us because it's the history. Like, what are you going to do?
But if you are going to come to complain to me and Zach. Don't harass Eleanor.
This is a very important point.
We'll actually be polite to you. We'll be polite to you. She will not.
That is so true. That is so true.
There is a phrase, know when you are beaten. Starting an argument with Eleanor over sex history, like, you're going to lose that. It's just a given. Eleanor, thank you so much for coming and filling this podcast with joy and hilarity and quality history. Folks, if you haven't already, you need to go and subscribe to the Going Medieval podcast and the We're Not So Different podcast, but also the Once and Future Sex Going Medieval on women's roles in society. Yes, It's a medieval text. But we're okay with that on this podcast in this instance, because the last 75 minutes that you've just enjoyed, Eleanor, an absolute joy to have you on. We're going to have to find an excuse to have you back to talk about more stuff in the future. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Folks, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. We will be back very soon. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest news, sign up to our mailing list. The link is in the description. And don't forget that you can enjoy early access to all episodes, exclusive episodes, online courses, and much more on Patreon. The link is in the description. And if you're looking for personalized merch for the Napoleonic nerd in your life, drop us a line on social media and we can design something for you. Shout outs to our patrons who, at the time of recording in mid-July 2025, were in the mentioned in dispatches tier: Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Jim Getz, Jeff Maple, Robin Brasher, Indiana Fats, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Anonymous American, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, Ted Andrews, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Joe Ayres, Peter Finley, Giovanni, Steve Gillen, Jean-Baptiste Van Merlen, Daniel Friedman, Neil Reed, Jonathan Willits, Wojciech Stefanovic, Zach Johnson, and Simon Weathers. The Admirals: Ian Harding, John Haynes, Mike Guest, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Priest, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Jason Morn, Tim Pritchard, Darla Vincent, and Rob Painter. The Chiefs of Staff: David Maxwell and Adam Coslin. The Marshals: Ryan Diamond and JC Kaiser. The Legion of Scholars: Kate Walcombe, Clemens Bevan, Dan Hazelwood, and Bob Burnham. And in the Crown Yourself tier, Emperor of the First French Empire Todd Campbell and the Duke of Wellington Laird Campbell. We'll be back very soon, but until then, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. On behalf of myself, Liam, Luke, and Josh, take care of yourselves, folks. Stay well. And as always, thank you for listening.